tray. It was early evening when I hit the edge of the trees. According to the small plastic compass clipped onto the zipper of my backpack, I was now heading northeast. Dad had said we should head north to the old lands. We told Mom we were heading east when we lost her at the seniors' home. I figured northeast was the safest bet. Now I was alone, leaving the smaller cities that had winked out long ago like Christmas lights on a faulty wire. The trees here were still tall, so I wasn't very far north, but they were dense, so I wasn't too south anymore either. My legs screamed from a night and day of ache and stretch, marinated in old adrenaline and scabbed with tree bark cuts. I collapsed under a pine. It was still spring, and I knew the night would be too cold for a single boy with no real shelter other than a thermal wrap and a couple layers of hoodies. The early moisture would set in, and I couldn't afford to get sick. So I built a modest fire, just big enough to cut the chill, and lay on my backpack under my head. Out here, stars were preparations revealing the bleached skeleton of the universe through a collection of tiny holes. And surrounded by these silent trees, beside a calming fire, I watched the bones dance. This was our medicine, these bones, and I opened up and took it all in, and dreamed of north. Cold is an effective alarm clock, and I was up before the sun. The fire had gone out, but not long ago, since there was still some smoke. The cough I'd been cultivating over the last few days was more insistent now. I coughed, and each push of air brought a fresh ache of my back and legs. The jump and run had really done a number. Still, I stood and started my jumping jacks, following Mitch's morning warm-up routine, even though he wasn't there to motivate me. Come on, French, I've seen higher from a boulder. I rolled my sweaters and the wrap and jammed them into my backpack before a quick breakfast of the second last tin of meal replacement drink and a granola bar with a bite already missing. My stomach grumbled when I finished, but there was maybe a day and a half of food supplies left in my pack, and I was headed into the woods. There'd be no grocery stores or abandoned duplexes to raid for leftovers and non-perishables. I wasn't quite sure how I would do it. Mom had said her uncles and grandpa were great hunters, that it was a family trait. Maybe it would just come to me like a blood memory or something. What would I even kill an animal with? A stick? I started back north, keeping my eyes to the ground for animal tracks with no idea what I would do if I actually saw some, or if I would even recognize what animal made them. By the time the sun reached center stage, a punctuation mark in the cloud-lined sky, I was miles into the woods. The trees were denser, the ground less manageable, and the wildlife, judging by the sounds and smell around me, had changed. I stopped in a small clearing filled with tall grasses and low bushes. It was the thud of my heart against the hollow bowel of my stomach that made me eat a cluster of dandelion weeds grown to waist height. They weren't bad. I added them to my available and edible list and clomped on, the plastic compass pressed into my palm like a toy talisman. I kept trudging north. You have to try to keep the goal in your head. You can't let what's not there, what's missing. You can't let that slow you down. Mom was trying hard to give us a pep talk on top of the seniors' home in a small city on our last night as a trio. With a monotone voice and that far-off look she'd taken on since Dad had left with the Lost Council, it was hard to take in the message. Her words fell in between us like sheets of rain downed planes. Defeated. Useless. Mom, here. Mitch held an open can of artichoke hearts he'd just grilled with a lighter. You need to eat. She ignored him. There were generations in our family where all we did was move, first by choice, then every time the black cars came from town and burned out our homes along the roadside. Now the cars are here again, only now they're white vans, and I can't run that fast. Not fast enough. Never fast enough. Mom! Mitch spoke louder, but still gently. I was huddled against the side of the gazebo, peering through the wooden lattice on the lookout for recruiters. You haven't eaten all day. You need to eat. Her eyes stayed fixed, away from the eldest. The smell from the lake here was nauseating. Once this was a popular city, being right on the water. Now this lake, like all the industry-plundered Great Lakes, was poison, and a tall fence blocked off from the overgrown streets. We hadn't been here more than a day, so the smell was pungent for us. We breathed into bandanas and built shelter from the stench with plywood and a tarp. Mitch tried a different tactic with Mom. If you don't eat, you won't have the strength to take a second shift tonight. Something flickered on her face, and she reached out, removed one pale heart from the cluster, and inserted it into her mouth like a chore. It was a few minutes before she spoke again. We have to move, my boys. Tomorrow we move, after I do one last forage in the old Friendship Center. Mom, no! That place is a hot spot for recruiters. It's a pretty obvious niche magnet. She squinted her eyes. Oh, now, the officers are long done with that place. There's no Indians left in this part of the city anyways. I'm just going to go look for a few things we'll need once we get past the city and into the bush. It'll only take me a minute. She reached for our hands and squeezed them, breathing deep and full like a prayer, chewing her bottom lip like a penis. The next day she left before we reheated artichokes for breakfast. And then Mitch and I were on our own. I was stumbling. Another night asleep in the open. This time I didn't have enough strength to rebuild the fire that had been rained out while I fitfully slept. My muscles ached, my belly rumbled, and my heart hurt. I tripped over an above-ground root bent like an arthritic finger and picked up a limp. The rain started again just after noon, and I sat under a dense pine nursing my last tin of meal replacement, the last resort tin with the expiry dated for the previous year. There was a sour current through the frothy top notes, but that's all that was left. I hadn't even seen any more damn dandelions. My molars screamed every time a swallow of liquid passed over it. Just this morning I had started contemplating dentistry with a rock. Or maybe I could just fall out of a tree, cheek first. I fell asleep biting a piece of shoelace, leaning against the pine trunk, wishing Mom would find me. A shiver woke me up. It was almost full dark, and my tooth hurt, and my ankle throbbed, and I'd spilled what was left of the tin on the ground beside my legs. Oh no! I righted the tin and shook it. Not even a mouthful left. Damn it! I tried to throw it into the woods, to make that last damn tin pay for my own carelessness. It arched up and hit the ceiling of a pine branches above me, slamming back to the ground not a foot in front of me. I kicked it instead. Jesus! My ankle sang a terrible song like my toothache, and had sunk into my foot. Rot and damp and hopelessness and hunger and fear and anger twisted up in a clamp around my rib cage. I sat back down, picked up the can, rubbed it across my greasy forehead, back and forth, back and forth. No one to take care of me now, no one to make me move. Where the hell was I going anyways? Where the hell was my mom? Why did she have to go to the Friendship Center? Her eyes that night, hollow like an old stump, like the hole in my molar, a true ache. I'm going to die. Saying it out loud was like hearing it from another person's mouth. It made my head well up with tears. I held on to them, precious water. I decided then that if I was going to die, I wasn't going to sit there and wait for the truancy dicks to come and get me. I'd die fighting wild animals, or swan diving from one of these pines, or starvation half buried in the drying earth like a partially cremated corpse floating down the old Ganges, before the Ganges became a footpath for heartbroken pilgrims. I stood up, dropped the can, shouldered my pack. Onward. I fell a couple of times, tripping over roots sticking out from the ground that was ashy and loose in the thinning earth, washed out from endless rain. I split my lip on the last tumble and tasted wet pennies and heavy perfume. Should have turned my head to hit the tooth, I thought. I laughed out loud, a desperate sound that made me laugh harder, so I had to stop, hands shaking on my knees, and wait out the wave of giggles that made it impossible to trudge on. The cold was near constant, stiff and phlegmy, like a sack of bricks slamming against my insides. It made me double over and drool. I broke a blood vessel in my right eye with the hack. The walk was slow, with sickness and the limp. I didn't even notice my stomach had pulled itself into a fist until I was being punched by it, nauseous and cold. And now, night was falling. No. I couldn't do anything to protect myself from it, so I whined. Shit. No. I leaned against a knobby pine, sticky with sap, that matted the back of my head to the bark, and watched the sky betray me into navy. I slid then, slow and painful, ripping out my hair so that a clump of me stayed behind pinned to the tree, nesting material for low-flying buzzards. The stars began to rip through the hard skin of dark, like the sharp points of silver needles through velvet. I watched them appear, wink and fade, and I smiled. This wasn't going to be so bad. Maybe the end is just a dream. That made me feel sorry for a minute for the others, the dreamless ones. What happened when they died? I imagined they just shutting off like a factory machines at the end of a shift, functioning, purposeful, and then just out. I closed my eyes, just for a minute. The dream came for me right away. Later, I couldn't recall what it had been or for how long I'd been asleep, but when I woke, it was reluctantly. Put him down over there, right close to the fire. He's breathing all funny. Never mind now, just prop up his head. Wab, go grab that quilt from my bedroll. Ziguan, heat up some water. We'll need to get some liquid into him. Voices. Voices with the pulled vowels and cut lid of my father. Voices with the low music of my mother. I couldn't open my eyes, not yet. This is too beautiful a dream, even just in audio. All right now, pull off his shoes and get his feet close to the pit. I felt tugging, and then the relief of a good swell allowed to spread out, then heat. Hey boy, can you hear me? You'll need to drink some of this water. A metal edge split my broken lips, and clear, warm water poured into my mouth. I spluttered at first, a reaction to the intrusion, and then the fist in my guts demanded it, and my throat opened up in compliance. The need was so great, the satisfaction so complete, I grasped for the vessel, lest it be pulled away. Easy now, easy now. I managed to open one eye. There was a man holding the tin, not my father, but a man with the same crease around his eyes. His hair was long down the middle and shaved close on the sides. He looked to be about my father's age. Over his right shoulder, a girl stared at me with one round, dark eye, her long hair draped around her face, flickering in tandem with the flames of the large fire. She handed a blanket to the man, who tucked it around me. Sigwan, get some soup over here. This boy is starved. The man spoon-fed me broth with sweet corn mush until the fist unclenched just enough for me to rest. Then he put it beside me on a flat rock. When you can hold it yourself, that's when you know it's okay for you to eat more without getting sick. I opened both eyes and looked around. There were more people now. There was the man, and the older girl who brought the blanket, who I saw was wearing an eye patch and had an angry red slash down her cheek. There was a child, not much older than a baby, sleeping in a nest of blankets like a puppy beside an old lazy dozing in her kerchief. Then there was a small, round boy, two taller boys who looked like they must be twins, and another tall boy whose face was hidden by the shadow of a hood. They all sat around a roaring fire on blankets and sleeping bags, and they all seemed to be native like me. Behind them were two canvas tents shut tight against the cold air and the new bugs that had found the blood around my mouth interesting. Who are you? It wasn't more than a whisper. It was the man who answered, standing to poke the branches into the fire. I'm Migwans, and this is my family. But not now. There'll be time for that tomorrow. You need to eat some more of that soup and then sleep. Tomorrow we move. Probably got some recruiters nearby with the racket you were kicking up by yourself out there. Migwans. I'd heard that name before. I could see my father's mouth pronouncing it with reverence, like he did for everything that had touched to the old about it. The words from our language, like a prayer. North. He turned his face to me, flames animating the shadows that fell there under his eyes, along his cheekbones. Yeah, that's right, north. We seem to be heading in the same direction. Might as well trudge on together then, eh? I didn't answer. The tears cleared away from the dirt away from my eyes, stinging as they crossed to my split lips. Sobs rocked me, open and closed until I was fetal. I was embarrassed to be so broken in front of all these new Indians. If they were embarrassed for me, no one made a motion or mouthed a reproach. They just let me be broken, because soon I wouldn't be anymore. Eventually, I wouldn't be alone either. And maybe tomorrow, I'd wake up and find myself closer to home.